Hey everyone, welcome back to A Taste of Medicine. I'm Michael Lawson. I wanted to just talk a little bit about my experience receiving the second dose of the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine. Before we get too deep into it, I do just have to do my disclaimer that any opinions shared on this channel or in this video are those of myself and not that of my employer. In the phase 3 trial data, Pfizer gave the vaccine 21 days apart in equal doses. I received the second vaccine in the Pfizer series on Monday, January 4th. After I had received the first vaccine, I felt pretty much totally normal, with the exception that I did feel like I had been punched in the arm pretty hard for about a day and a half. But I didn't experience any systemic or total body symptoms over that time period of the first dose. With the new year brings New Year's resolutions. And while I had been relatively active over 2020, decided to do more strength training and happened to do a fair number of squats and lunges before going to get the second vaccine dose on Monday. Unsurprisingly, that turned out to be a poor decision. And even before I went to the vaccine, my legs completely felt like jello. I knew they were going to be quite sore for a couple of days. I got the second dose of the vaccine around 3:30 on Monday and felt completely normal for the entirety of the day, with the exception of I noticed a little pain in the arm around the time I went to bed, around 11 p.m. or so. The next day, I was quite sore. It was hard going down the steps. And again, I knew that was going to happen because of the ridiculous number of lunges and squats I attempted without any sort of pre-training. But really made it through the rest of the morning and early afternoon with no problems. Felt totally fine otherwise. But as my afternoon meetings finished up, I did start to feel more achy and tired. So right around 3:30, which was almost exactly 24 hours after my second dose, I just didn't feel well at all. I basically laid on the couch for the next 2 hours, and then when my wife got home from work, I went and laid in bed for the rest of the evening. My symptoms were basically aches and just kind of feeling like crap. I did have a short period of chills that lasted for maybe 20 minutes or so, but honestly, by the time I went to bed, I was feeling much more normal. My aches had largely resolved, with the exception of the soreness in my legs. No chills. I never had any headache. And while I did feel like I had a fever the period I was having chills, I took my temperature and it was normal. And the next morning I felt back to normal. So for me, the period of feeling crummy started 24 hours after the second dose and lasted for about 7 hours. And before we go too much further, I did just want to also show the cumulative incidence curve from the Pfizer phase 3 trial data. If you watched, my first or second video, I realized that I couldn't use the New England Journal of Medicine articles without paying them a significant amount of money. Fortunately, the FDA published all of these online as well. Here in figure 13, you can see the cumulative incidence curve. Again, this looks almost exactly the same as what we saw in the Moderna study. Along the X or horizontal axis, we're seeing days after dose 1. Along the Y or vertical axis, we're seeing the cumulative incidence of COVID-19 both in the placebo group in red and in the vaccine group in blue. After we get to about 10 days after dose 1, you start to see the two groups differentiate, quite drastically so. Again, the whole point of a randomized control trial is that you try and make both groups look as similar as you can, and you do that by randomly assigning people to groups and making the trial as big as possible. So any difference we see between the two groups is going to be due to the only difference in them, whether they got placebo or whether they got the vaccine. A cool aspect of this phase 3 trial data is that they looked at side effects both by location, whether it was at the injection site or total body, and also by age, whether it was within the 16-year-old to 55-year-old group or the 56-year-old plus group. Figure 9 goes over the local reactions in the 16 to 55-year-old group. And as you can see, both in dose 1 at the top and dose 2 at the bottom, By far and away, the most common local side effect of the injection in this age group was pain. And just as it was for me, these symptoms, whether local or systemic, consistently lasted for about a day or two. Figure 10, we also have local reactions, this time in those over 55. At the top we have dose 1 and at the bottom we have dose 2. And what's worth noting is in those who are older than 55, they had fewer side effects. But again, pain was the most common. In figure 11, we see systemic or total body symptoms. At the top we have dose 1, at the bottom dose 2, and then within each column, which is a different side effect, we see both the numbers for those who actually received the vaccine, denoted by BNT162b2, exciting, or placebo. One of the important trends that we're seeing is that those side effects within those who received the vaccine is higher pretty much across the board with the second dose. The most common side effects across the board seem to be fatigue, headache, chills, and muscle pain. That's consistent with my own experience, with the exception of I never experienced any headache. In figure 12, we see systemic events in the older age group. Similarly, the most common side effects being fatigue, headache, chills, and muscle pain. And just as we saw in the local side effect figures, those who were over 55 were less likely to experience any of these side effects than those who were younger than 55. One of the main ideas of why this is that those who are younger are going to have a more robust immune response, and that's how we kind of know that the vaccine is working, that our body is mounting a fight against what it views as this foreign invader. The final thing to point out is that across all these figures, the vast majority of symptoms were defined as either mild or moderate, being denoted by the color green and yellow. And I've talked to a handful of other people who are around my same age group, less than 55, who also experienced similar kind of feelings. One of my colleagues experienced mostly chills, another fatigue and headache, and so this is really consistent with what we're seeing from the trial data. I timed my second dose so that I would have a few days off before going into a string of evening and night shifts, and I'm very glad that I did. So if you experienced any of these symptoms before or are in a younger age group and are going to be more likely to experience those symptoms, I think it would be wise, particularly around the second dose, to not have anything critical or super important booked for the next day, because you should bank on not feeling your best. The last thing I want to do is just talk a little bit more about some of the scary, severe symptoms that people were talking about when this first rolled out, namely anaphylaxis. Anaphylaxis is a severe allergic reaction which is life-threatening. The week that it first rolled out, there were news reports of a handful of people experiencing anaphylaxis pretty shortly after receiving the vaccine. There were questions led to why we didn't see that in the trial data. As the entire trial was only 38,000 people, it's therefore not that surprising that we didn't see any episodes of anaphylaxis within the trial, because it's less frequent than even the total number of people who received the vaccine at that time. The CDC also released a Morbidity and Mortality weekly report today on January 6th, going over the doses from December 14th to the 23rd. As of December 23rd, there had been 1.89 million first doses of Pfizer's vaccine given within the United States. After all of those doses of vaccine, 21 cases of anaphylaxis were found. In this figure, we see the number of patients and at what time they experienced anaphylaxis after they received the vaccine. 18 of the 21 cases of anaphylaxis were experienced within the first 30 minutes, and 17 of the 21 cases were patients who had experienced anaphylaxis in the past. So to get one case of anaphylaxis, you have to vaccinate over 90,000 people. And even with it being that rare, the biggest risk factor is having anaphylaxis in the past. So if you've never had anaphylaxis, this really shouldn't be a concern. When we look at the phase 3 trial data, I could have told you that I was probably going to feel crummy, for about a day or so. And I would have been right. And while I don't enjoy feeling crappy for a period of 7 hours, this tells me that what we're reading in the phase 3 trial data is holding true. The incidence of severe side effects is exceedingly rare, and the side effects that are common are usually mild to moderate and last for a short period of time. And so there's no reason not to believe the cumulative incidence curve. And this is why we're getting the vaccine in the first place. If you're getting the vaccine, your chances of contracting COVID are exceedingly low. Now, we don't know how long that's going to last. We don't know the duration of the immunity to expect, but we got to start somewhere. So if I had to do this all over again, I would absolutely take this vaccine without hesitation. As more data comes forward, we are going to learn more. And there may be new recommendations from one of the governing bodies or from the CDC or from your physicians or from me. But that's not a bad thing. See, one thing that I think we need to understand, or that those of you who aren't in science or medicine need to understand, is it's a good thing when scientists and physicians change their mind in the face of new information. You know, if I practiced medicine the same way it was practiced in 1950, I'd be a total quack. So this idea that with some brand new virus that's killed hundreds of thousands of people, that we would change our recommendations as we learn more about it, and that's viewed as a bad thing, is just, it doesn't make any sense. You know, too often in today's culture, we value people who are consistent, regardless of how the situation changes. And that just is not a good thing. That is a sin in medicine and in science. We need to constantly be practically skeptical, where if we get new information, have to kind of wrestle with it to figure out if it's going to change our practice, how good the data is, if it flies in the face of something we know, is there something else we're missing. This is how progress happens. This is how technology advances. This is how knowledge furthers. This isn't something to fear or chide or critique. So, as updates happen, I'm going to present that data to you. And I'll leave it there. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time.